welcome back. You are in the studio at Island Money 365. I'm your host, Petra Ian Brown, and I have the wonderful, wonderful Martha Alejandro-Bird with me. Say hello, Martha.
Hello.
I'm so glad to have you here with me. So let me give you a wonderful bio because this is amazing. All right. I'm like, oh, it's a native of Bridgeport, which I am too. So yay, Bridgeport, and a graduate of Basic High School and the Upper Bound program at Fairfield University. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Fairfield University and served as a lieutenant in the United States Navy Nurse Corps. Martha has a 34-year nursing career with experience in various specialties, including mental health, trauma, orthopedics, intensive care, and interventional radiology. So this is the part I like, Martha. And she said she earned her master's degree in adult gerontology, primary care from Duke University School of Nursing, graduating with honors, of course, that's what us immigrants do. Martha is certified by the American Academy of Nurse Practitioners and has worked as a nurse practitioner in gastroenterology. That's why I didn't go to nursing school, okay? Or doctor. My mom wanted me to be a doctor. I said, no, I can't pronounce the words. She also serves as an adjunct clinical instructor at Duke University, supporting a course on global medicine in Honduras. An advocate for an active lifestyle, Martha has completed 4 Marine Corps marathons, 4 half marathons, 2 century bike rides, and a 1-mile open water swim. She enjoys hiking, dancing, traveling, and cooking. Married for 29 years. Yes. Congratulations. She has 2 adult children, and her philosophy is, if you are not your best, it is very hard to give your best. I like that. I really, really like that. Where does that come from? When I was reading that and I thought, I'm like, man, where does that come from, Martha? I love it.
I think we, as nurses at least, we're givers, right? And then we're mothers, we're givers, we're wives, we're givers, we're children, we're friends, and we are givers. And sometimes you can just drain your battery by just giving, and then you're also taking in a lot of, at least in my line of work, you take in what everybody's telling you, and some of it is very emotional, and people trust you implicitly with their personal information, and so you kind of take it all in. It's kind of like using your cell phone, right? If you use it, and you don't charge it, it's going to give out on you. So I found that when I was struggling was when I was not taking care of myself. And I thought, well, how can I be good to anyone, my family, my husband, my patients, if I don't take care of me? So it was one of those journeys that I just thought, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I need to take care of me, because I also need to set the example.
Yeah, I like that. I need to start doing that too. I need to start doing that as well. Immediately, right? Immediately. So I love your bio, but I was so confused actually, because I was like, how did you come to this path, right? Adult gerontology and then practitioner in gastroenterology. Like, please share your journey. Please share your journey with us from being a nurse to becoming to both of these fields. How did it work together, Martha?
So, it's funny because I actually thought about shifting gears, leaving nursing.
Really?
Yeah. I worked for a very long time in radiology, and I loved it. Interventional radiology, I loved it. But then, my husband is active duty military, so we relocated for him. And you think, oh, you can get a job anywhere, and it was a lot harder because I was trying to find that work experience and that work family to continue that tradition. And I just I wanted more, always looking for more. I have a natural curiosity, and so I had a friend who was also the director of my last job in radiology. And when she was going through some physical issues, she, said, well, you've gone through this, and what is your take? And so I would just kind of offhandedly, critically think through, these are the things that I would look for. Long story short, she was very sick. She was diagnosed with cancer, and she died. But before she died, she said to me, you really should become a nurse practitioner. And I was kind of like, nah, I'm not ready for that. I don't know that I want to do that. And in the interim, I actually took, I had my legal nurse consultant when I had my daughter. So I had that under my belt. And I thought about law school. I was really fascinated by it. So I was able to take a course at Stanford. It was called Constitutional Law, and I loved it. I so much so that I talked to the professor, and he said, I will endorse you if you decide to go to law school. He was very pleased with my performance, and I taught myself how to, study for the LSATs, and I actually took them. And my score was good considering I hadn't opened a book in 30 years. But I wanted more because I wanted to get in a better school. In the meantime, my husband said, all right, I'm going to take the chance of upsetting you by telling you something, but that's what best friends are for. And he said, I think you're going to miss your patients, you know? And so we were supposed to go away, and he said, I think you should go do a little soul searching. And also, so I did. And there was some prayer involved in it, honestly. And I just kept thinking, what can I do to serve and be happy?
Mm.
And I powered up again. Many times I had been looking at, nurse practitioner programs half-heartedly, and Duke University popped up because I was looking at the top programs in the country. And back in 2017, it was ranked number 3 in the master's program, MSN program. And I found out that, they have an incredible commitment to education, diversity, just preparing the future leaders in the nurse practitioner role. And also that they had like 6 different specialties that I can choose
Wow.
from. And I said, you know what? It had never popped up in my prior searches. So I was like, okay, that was my message. And the process went from there. And, I shifted gears, and that's where I ended up going. I applied, went through the interview process, and I was fortunate to be a member of that class of
That's
2019.
amazing. So you mentioned something about legal nurse. What is that?
So when I was after I had my daughter, I didn't want to go back to school, and I've always had this interest in the law. And there's a legal nurse consultant course that you take, and what it does is it pretty much teaches you the broad spectrum of uh, tort law, um, re, some tort law, wills, just a basic um,
Hmm.
approach to law, if you will. And you could sit for a certification. I ended up not doing that because by then my daughter was born, and I was already on an extension to finish. But it allows you to confer with attorneys. You can look at, for example, medical records and decide, does this case have merit or
Oh,
not?
wow.
Yeah, and you can work with them. Some legal nurse consultants are work independently, and they serve as consultants, if you will. But
Wow.
that helped me at work because what I did was I looked at the uh, the forms that people fill out, the consent forms, and make sure that they're okay. But I also translated them in Spanish to make sure it was covered. And this was before, the groups were brought in to take over all that admin stuff. But it gave me an eye
Hmm.
for something different. It helped me kind of just say to my parents, hey, if you don't have a will, you're now intestate, and this is, you're going to go to probate. And so it doesn't matter if it's $10 or $100,000. You need to have a will, you
Well,
know?
thank you. That's what I do as a financial coach. I'm like, people, please put something in writing, please, at a bare minimum, do a will. So thank you for saying that. See, financial advice coming through. Financial. So, Martha, so let's be clear. What is it that you are practicing? Because you do a lot. There's a lot in here. So what is it that you are doing right now at this stage?
So before I went to school, when I relocated, did the legal nurse, I'm sorry, the law course that I took, constitutional law, I was already working in GI, and I was brought in to begin the program of the preparation nurses. So this gave the nurse practitioners and the doctors the ability to see the patients that were having issues. And then for a prep nurse, what we did was make sure that back then, you're 50 years old, you're not having any issues, you need to have your colonoscopy, update their history, get their medication information, go over the preparation with them. And of course, I always went above and beyond. You know, I did a physical exam, you know, quick heart, lungs, you know, vital signs are good. And then they would schedule them for the procedure. And so we were able to sustain that program, and they still do it. So at that point, I had a couple of mentors who said, you know, I think you really should go back to school. And I think by then I was receptive. You know, my husband says when he's talking to the kids, when they're in receive mode is when I attack, you know, in a nice way, because I know they're going to hear what I'm saying. So I was in receive mode, and I felt like I was ready to take that next step, you know.
So that's what motivated you to go further in your education to obtain that
Yes.
MSN?
Yep. And so I graduated, and it was during COVID. So that was a big challenge for me. Moved to California where my husband was stationed, and couldn't find a job. Nobody would hire a new nurse practitioner. And then the jobs that were there, I could have done as a nurse, you know. And so I didn't struggle hard, work my tail off to get my degree and my credentialing, pass the boards, to do something that didn't really use my skills. So then my husband and I decided he was eventually going to come back, but we decided, well, you know what, let's open up the aperture. And I applied to where we were living before, because we kept the house and my son was there waiting to go into the service. And I found a job in gastroenterology, but it wasn't the practice that I was working with. And I stayed in touch with my mentor, who's a nurse practitioner, and he said to me, well, he told the doctor, she's applied to another one. They've interviewed her. And he's like, oh no, you get her here. So I ended up working with them, and they took me under their wing. And, you know, there's a steep learning curve in gastroenterology. But you know what? They really gave me a solid foundation. And so that's where it ended up. So when you do, for example, adult gerontology, primary care, I can work in a primary care office, do internal medicine. And originally my plan was, let me go there, let me cut my teeth with internal medicine, and then go into a specialty, whatever it is. Well, the universe didn't work like that. And so I ended up in GI with some really great mentors that I still stay in touch with, that were incredibly supportive. And that's what I did for the last three and a half years. So we deal with, you know, anything that starts with the mouth and ends up in the butt, the other end, you know, the
I
body.
like that.
But it also includes like your gallbladder, the pancreas, the liver, you know. So that's what makes it that much more involved. It's kind of like the second primary care, because you deal with a lot. And then with COVID, you saw the other component of gastroenterology issues, and that's the mental health component. So there's a lot there to dissect. But that's, you know, it's been my specialty. And one of the things that I really focus on is the colon cancer screening, especially in the Latino and African American communities, because people didn't talk about their health care, you know, and they just, it's a personal thing to them, which is fine, but it helps us as the providers to say, okay, what's the family history, right? If somebody has, let's say you have a person who's diagnosed with cancer, colon cancer at 45. Well, 10 years younger than that, we want to see their children, because they're a first degree relative who's been diagnosed with it, you know. So these things are important. And I had a patient who said to me, you know, they spoke Spanish, said, I don't come to gastroenterology because there's no one there that understands me, you know. And so I said, well, you tell your friends I'm here, you know, because sometimes I think it's, you know, it's easy to tell people, you know, adjust your diet and do all of these things, but you have to take into consideration what they were raised with, right? What are their dietary, what are their thoughts on their health? So you know, it's I'm unfolding a lot here, but yeah,
No,
that's
I'm
how
glad you said that, honestly, because I went to a dietitian once and they're telling me to eat these things. I'm like, this is not even in my culture. I'm like, where's my boiled dumpling? Where's my rice and peas? I'm like, how am I going to? I've never seen these foods in my life. You know, I see them in like when I go to buffet, but I would never go pick those out. So how can I be healthy in the foods that I'm eating within my culture? You have to take that into consideration, right? So I'm glad you said that. So with that said, I'm going to ask you this question. How do you address cultural diversity and sensitivity in your practice to ensure, inclusive and equitable care for all patients? And it's a long question. And what role do you think cultural competence plays in improving patient outcomes?
well, it's very important. One of the things we were taught is, uh, probably 90% of your diagnosis is your history, right? And part of that is, you know, what does home look like? What is the family history? What are your social habits? What do you eat, right? So all of these things can affect your GI health. But when people are telling you that story, sometimes they go off a little bit. And although you're under the constraints of time, it's very important to listen to what they're saying because sometimes that affects it, right? You can have someone who's had a trauma, they've lost a child to violence, and that affects their health, What do they eat? When do they eat? What is their work schedule like? Are these people working minimum wage jobs for 12 hours a day? If they miss a day to do an appointment, you want to maximize that. Can they afford to have this expensive procedure? So you got to factor in all of those things, and really it's meeting them at their point of need. What brings them here, and what are the factors that brings it in? Can they afford their medications? Having someone say, at the end of the month, I have to decide what I'm going to eat or if I'm going to buy this medication.
Mm.
That gives me okay, now I need to figure out how we can get creative, how we can, you know, manage their symptoms and try to get them the medications they need, at an affordable price. And sometimes it's very hard. Sometimes you have to really involve, the pharmacy, the primary care, the drug reps. What kind of programs do you have out there? So I think it's very important. And one of the things I learned from a preceptor of mine while I was in school was meeting them at their points of need. What is it that concerns them the most, and what do they identify as the most important thing for them, so that you can get them there. And respecting, I'll say to them, okay, 24-hour recall. What'd you have for breakfast yesterday? What'd you have for lunch? What'd you have for dinner? And that's important to me because I had a professor who was from Colombia. Us Latinos, we love our rice and peas, frijoles, Uh,
Yes.
I know for us, we like our fried stuff too. Isn't great, but and um, the roast pork during the holidays. There's a lot there.
Yes.
Well, she was having issues with weight, and the doctor said to her, "Well, you need to adjust your diet. You need to have some tabbouleh. You need to have some couscous, some hummus." And she was just like, "What the heck is that?" Exactly what you said.
Yes. What
I
is
never heard of
it?
that stuff. So she left there very discouraged. And I just thought, that was in school. And I just realized they didn't take the time to listen to what's important. What do you eat? We love our rice and beans. One of the things I tried was the cauliflower rice. It ain't the same, but I can have more of it and have my beans and still, so it's finding what's important to them, what influences there are, whether it be family, environmental, social, and incorporate that all into their care plan, right? Because I tell them, listen, at the risk of being personal, this is blah, 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 and I say to them, I want you to understand that the person sitting across from you is a human being. I have my own issues. And so I take, you know, I take that very seriously in listening to what you have. And I tell them, I said, for me, if I don't understand something, good luck getting me to do it. So
Exactly.
I always end my visits with, is this what you expected? Do you agree with this plan? Or is there something that you would rather have seen, that you were expecting? And sometimes people are surprised because we're raised, my mother, right? For example, paternalistic medicine. The doctor tells you do it, It's done. There's no questions asked. And I tell them, I want us to have a relationship. I want you to be comfortable telling me, yes or no, not really, actually, and sometimes they don't say it. It's their facial expression and say, okay, I didn't get a warm and fuzzy. Let's talk about that, because I want them to succeed. I want to see them, but I don't want to see them often because they didn't quite understand or they didn't buy into it. You know what I'm saying? So that's important. And if you don't take that into consideration, you're going to miss something,
Yeah,
or they're not going to be compliant and they're not going to have a good outcome.
absolutely. I completely agree. I've experienced a lot of different things in terms of personal care because when I migrated here, most immigrants they go to the community clinic because we don't have the insurance yet. We're going through that process. We go to the community clinic, and you feel like it is so much. It's so overwhelming there because there's a lot of people there, right? A lot of immigrants there, a lot of us trying to figure this thing out. And I think that the doctors are tired, and also some were good. Like we had a really good PCP as a young child, but then also some were like I feel like we're so indifferent, So, and even now, actually, I'm going through the process of changing my PCP because I was like, I am not going through this. I've been in America long enough. I don't have to take this. I know what the system is. I don't have to take this kind of care. So I just feel like they don't care. And not everybody's like, I'm not generalizing, but I feel like some people just don't take the time anymore. They want you in, they're not listening, they want you out, which is so unfortunate. So how has your background in trauma, critical care, and outpatient specialty influenced your, approach to personal care, to primary care?
So mine has been more specialized, but when I was doing my rotations, what's important about all of those different aspects of what I've done leading up to this role is that it gives me a more in-depth appreciation of what it is that they possibly went through. The other thing is the long-term effects of, a trauma, right? If somebody has a gunshot wound and they have, multiple surgeries, you have scars, right? Adhesions. How is that going to affect things? How does it affect your psyche? So it adds a little bit more, so as a primary care, you have a broad sense of different things, but this just gives me an extension to um, or an extension of what I already know based on the things that I've seen. It can play into, how patients respond to care, and everybody's different. So what that does is, and when I need to go to a specialist, if I went back to primary care and started seeing patients, I'd probably do a little bit more of a workup in GI before I send them to make sure that we're optimizing their finances. If somebody's coming in, they're cash only, and we can handle it, that's fine, because that would have been the first step that GI would have taken, and that way when I'm sending them to them, they're not telling them, okay, try this and then come back. No, we've already done that. And so you got to think about, what is their insurance if they're cash out, how does that help them? But for me, it's once again just putting it all together, individualizing the care plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's different, and it's what we call patient centric care, right? They're at the center of it, and our job is to understand them, how they respond to certain illnesses, what are their compliance issues. So I just think it's important to have that um, broad uh, experience, if you will,
Mm,
to just kind of it's another tool in your
I like
toolbox.
that.
You're taking care of these patients, like the subtle things that you might have not thought of before.
Yeah. So, Martha, how did you end up in the military? And do you think that shaped your practice and what you're doing with your individual in the GI world?
Hmm. Actually, I got recruited as a junior in college, um, and I was like, I'm not ready to go. And I worked hard and pulled a loan, had scholarships in order to get through without owing anything. So thankfully, my sacrifices, during school financially paid off, because when I graduated, I didn't have any loans. But it was a struggle getting there. But my friends were like, "Why are you talking to the military?" And I said, "Well, because I'm interested." And so I took a job. I moved down to Maryland, and That was where I did the step down trauma. And I just was looking for something else. I moved down there with two of my college nursing friends, and they decided to do travel nursing, and I joined the Navy. By then I was again in receive mode, and I went in, and when I got there, I was there during Desert Storm, so I was on the standby when that crew came. If they were going back out, I was on that roster. We ended up not going, but we did take care of a lot of the patients that came back banged up, if you will, from Desert Storm. So yeah, I worked on the floors for a couple years, and then I transitioned into ICU, and that's where I was until I met my husband. And when we got engaged, I realized that I want a family, and two active duty members was going to be really hard on a family. So I bowed out gracefully, stayed in as a reservist, and then resigned my commission when my daughter was born, which was a big deal because then she was born in April, and then at 10 months, no, actually 8 months was when 9/11 happened. And, they were pulling all the reservists up. So, I had this, sense that I needed to, you know, resign it because I love my family, but it's my responsibility to raise my kids,
I like that. I like that a lot. Absolutely. So do you think that shaped your practice and that experience and everything that you've gone through, just how you deal with your patient?
you know I love working with, I see all kinds of patients, and some people are veterans, and so you have that, and we have that in common. But one of the things is it augmented my adaptability, right? Growing up, things were really tight financially, and I was raised by a single parent, and so we had to be adaptable to whatever it was, and so I think that reinforced that adaptability. There was teamwork, collaboration, and knowing that there's always somebody that knows something more about something. Um, One doctor challenged me one time because I said I didn't like something, and he says, "Well, sometimes we don't like the things we don't understand." And I was like, "Oh, how dare you?" And thinking to myself, I wouldn't have said that to him. But what that did was it challenged me to understand what is it that I don't like. It's because I didn't understand it, and he was right, but I wasn't going to tell him that.
Of course not.
You got to be a little stubborn. But that was one of the things that, and also to be flexible, right? I've done a lot of thought about the things I would bring forth, but also, something that we share, and it's that, the Jesuit ideal, continuous learning, you know, we are each created uniquely, and, our commitment to, the classroom, the respect for diversity, the differences, and an emphasis on holistic care. So this also, these are building blocks for me. So, I've done my due diligence, right, in practice, but I've also um, allowed the universe or God to kind of guide my path. And these were building blocks. I went to a well-known, still highly respected and ranked undergrad nursing program. I joined the military because when I did, my cousin said to me, she called me, and she was a high-ranking enlisted member in the Air Force, and she says, why is it all the girls in our family have gone Air Force? Why are you doing Navy? And I said, well, because Navy medicine's where it's at.
Let her know.
Yeah, I was stationed at Bethesda, which at the time was the National Naval Medical Center that, treated president, vice president, senators, congressmen, admirals, everything, and you want to be the best, right? And it was interesting because when I was between my junior year and senior year at Fairfield, I took an internship at Cedars-Sinai in LA. And one of the reasons that I was drawn to it is because their mission statement was to be the best, be among the best.
I like
And
that.
and that really just spoke to me. So that really got my steam train rolling, if you will.
I like that. I should tell you, my mom went for her nursing degree also at Fairfield University.
Oh wow, really?
Yes. She got her
Awesome.
undergrad at Fairfield University and her master's.
And now
She's
you
thinking
have
about going for
legacy.
APRN as well. So it's very interesting. Our life crossing a lot of different ways. So
Mm-hmm.
do you know, I know you said no, times were hard. Do you know your money? Oh, good. Not do you know your money story. What is your money story?
I mean, one word sums it up. It was tight. You know, it was budget, but I was thinking about it because I was trying to think, well, what's a money story? As I'm researching what it is, it's all the influences that we have, right? And I think about my mom. She had an eighth grade education, but that woman knew how to run a household. She used to tell us the day there's not enough money for food, and your husband mentioned in a prior podcast about, or was it you? If you have rice and flour, you're good to go.
Yes.
Well, she said the day we don't have that, you're gonna get a cup of water with sugar, and you're going to bed. That was it. But thankfully, that never happened because you know what? She was a saver. She worked in the factory. She used to come home with her fingers really red because back then, before OSHA, they had to like bend plastics and they didn't really have the best. So she'd come home like with her hands just like essentially probably like some first degree burns, for
Mhm.
all we knew. And then she had to get in line for food stamps because she didn't have it. And you get to a point where, are you going to be prideful? You also talked about that in that podcast. Or do you just take the help because you need it and you know that it's there for a limited time? And then my mom went on and got her GED, and she got her CNA. And for many people it's like, oh, whoop-de-doo, but it's like, if you knew the journey, then you know that this is a big deal, and
Yeah.
she was really proud of that. But she was always a saver, and if we didn't have it, we weren't going to get it. I wanted to dance. There wasn't going to be money for dance. We were either going to eat, or we were going to pay for dance school. So you learned to just do with what you had. And if you didn't have
Yeah.
it, if she, when she got paid once a month, maybe we would go and get a big pie of pizza. And there was a place, I think it was Emmy's Pizza. They had it at the mall, but there was one on the bottom of Golden Hill Street. It's not even there anymore, but that was like carrying that up Golden Hill Street to the Greens, the projects back then. That was a big deal, but we also, it was portion control. What you had was what you had. And, she really managed her money. And some days like um I had to learn how to budget my money at maybe 16 years of age. And she always taught us to save. Back then, what was minimum wage, like 3.40, something like
I
that?
know. I
And I
know.
used to work at Park City Hospital, which isn't there anymore. And my treat was when I got my paycheck, I would go to People's Bank, I would save, and then make whatever payments I had, and then I would treat myself to a Friendly's ice cream back when Lafayette Plaza was there.
Yes.
Way back. So there was a little reward, but most of it was savings, and that was the best thing that she could have taught me, was because when I got accepted to Fairfield, I had to send them $200
Mm.
to secure my spot. And I was like, how am I going to do that? I didn't want to ask my mom because she had already done so much,
Mm-hmm.
but I had this little savings, and I wrote that little check out and sent it to them, and that paved my future. But it's because she taught us to save. We would get clothing donated, and that's what we wore. And sometimes there wasn't time to shop, and it's hard as teenagers because everybody's dressed a certain way and you want to
Mm-hmm.
fit in. But I wasn't
Yeah.
that kid, and I had to
Yeah.
learn what my limits were. And I'll tell you, when I was at Fairfield, they used to tease me about me wearing the same clothes and it didn't look like everybody else's. I stayed in touch with this girl. We're still friends, but it was important because, we've talked about, yeah, I remember when, and that was, I took it well. I didn't really care. And what I said to her was, back then, I couldn't afford to care. I was either going to get my education or I was going to look good and look cute and look like everybody else. I didn't have that, you know. So, it was tight, but my mom taught us how to save, and that sometimes we're going to have to sacrifice. We can't go to that party, or we can't go to this dance. We're not going to be able to do these things, but you think about big picture, in the end, what you were able to do.
Yeah.
and I was able to graduate without any type of debt from the college and, the university, and start the trajectory of my career.
Yeah, we are so similar lives. I tell you, Martha, because it made me so emotional because, as I said, my mom came here. Um, she was a teacher in Jamaica. She came here and clean floors and take care of other people, children. That was what she did. And like your mother, she worked her butt off. She got her CNA and then she went and she got her RN. And, it's just, and like you, people made fun of me and my clothes, but I just did not care because the hope that we have, and that's what's so beautiful about this country, you can transform yourself, so you just have to be happy where you are, be content where you are at that time as you work to go to where you want to be, so the amazing, that's why like I started this podcast for immigrants, because the transformation and the work that we put in to get to where we want to go, and the sacrifices and willingness to become nothing. And what in other people are like, oh, why are you doing that kind of job? What? This is a lifesaver. This is an amazing job. There's nothing that's beneath us, just so that we can provide and hope and provide for our kids and our family is just amazing, amazing.
And it's an honest living, right? And
Yes.
you know one of my friends, who she's older, I met her when I was a candy striper at Park City Hospital, and she said, Martha, as long as you understand that there's always going to be somebody with more than, you're going to be okay. They're either going to
Mm.
be, smarter than you, prettier than you, taller than you, more athletic than you, more financially off than you. There's always going to be someone. Embrace where you are and just move forward. And I honestly, that's one of the things I've imparted to my children is, what you possess in this brain of yours, nobody can take that away from you. Barring a traumatic brain injury, nobody can take that from you. Don't
Yeah.
don't pick that up and be comfortable with who you are. You know,
Yes.
and that's those are, one of my friends told me, it's not my quote, but sometimes we want so much to give our kids the things that we didn't have that we forget to give them the things that we did,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't, I missed this part of my journey that I tell you about when I was trying to have my second baby, right? It was challenging. And then I got into a program, at MSN at Southern, and I was doing nursing education because I thought, I want to teach the next generation. But I had to make a decision. Once I had that baby, do I, do I am I selfish and take care of other people, or do I take care of what's right in front of me, what's important, right? My legacy, my children. And it was a no-brainer, and I went in, I was doing well, but my professor said, you're not here to talk about your thesis, are you? But I bring that up because sometimes you have to make the sacrifice to bring it back to, financially, yes, we save, we do our best to live within our means, and, we have to make those sacrifices. But then it also speaks to why is it so important for us, is because it was important for our parents, and that's taking care of like that main, the most important thing is what's within our four walls. That's our
Yes.
responsibility to society. We teach them the lessons that we learned from our parents, the financial, the personal, the being a good person to make this place better, right? When we leave it than when we found it.
Yes, I agree. So I know you say you're in the Fairfield University, I didn't leave with any student loans, which is amazing because that's what's one of the number one debt in America
Mm-hmm.
right now. Student loans, credit cards, all that kind of stuff. How did you do that? Can you discuss the financial challenges you faced with that, or how you overcame that?
So, I applied for um, scholarship because, I was a first generation going to college. My mom had five children, and I was the only one that went to college. And then many years later, my sister went, as an adult. So applying for that. And then I worked, the one thing that Bassick High School did is they had a health services program. Mrs. Curiali was the best. Um, and we all, when we finished that year-long course, we sat for the state CNA certification. She prepared us for that. So guess what? We all had a job we can do. If we didn't go to college, we at least worked as a CNA and eventually worked our way up.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I worked as a CNA during school, and I remember one of my friends. He was on the basketball team, full scholarship. I was going to work. I was working at Greenwich Hospital from 7 p to 7 a, so 12-hour nights on the weekend, Fridays and Saturdays, to make money. And he said, Martha, why are you up all night? Do you think you're gonna miss something? And I said, no. Unlike you, if I don't work, I don't come to school.
Mm.
So part of it was scholarship, and part of it was work, like work, and I pulled a loan for whatever the balance was that I was short on. So that's how I did it. And then some days when I would come back, so back then you just showed up with your card, and you got a sticker, right? What is the for the fall semester, the spring
Yep.
semester. Some days I was nervous that they were going to tell me, "Oh, you fell short. You can't come back this semester." That was fearful for me. So I worked hard. I worked in the summer, and then every summer when I got that tuition went up, I'm like, oh. So I would go to Mr. Mazon, who was director of minority relations, and he would give me some guidance, and then I would go see the gentleman who's in charge of scholarships. I'm like, sir, I really, I can't do much more. What can I do? One of the things that when I can, I like to donate. I donate to the women's basketball program, and that's because my sophomore year, when the books were the most expensive because they were all the medical books, I couldn't afford some of them. So I had to borrow books to get through some of the classes. But for the um, medical books, the coach at the time asked me to be a manager for the basketball team, and they took care of all my books, and that was like couldn't have
Wow.
been the best. Yeah,
That's the
you know.
best gift.
But it was hard because we were traveling a lot, and you're trying to study, but you're tired. And I will say that I kind of stumbled academically because it was very hard to manage all of that. Um, but then I finished off the year. Happened to be the year we won the MAC champions. But I had to go back to redirecting my focus, because it was either I was gonna get back on the horse and do this right, or I'm gonna be doing something other than nursing. So but at the time it was what helped me financially. Then I went back to work, and I worked with the staff at Greenwich Hospital was great. And then my professors, I said to them, some days I may be a little bit tired, but it's because I'm working nights to just pay to be here, you
Mm.
know. And so, everyone was really helpful, but I was also an advocate for myself. Like, I need this, I need that. And I didn't ask my mom for a dime because I knew she couldn't afford it. So I was doing all this at 17 years of age, and every year it was just like, all right, where can I go, what can I do, how much more time can I work somewhere without affecting my academics
Yeah. I was doing
so
3 jobs myself, just trying to put myself through. So, and I, like you, I got those letters saying you need to pack up right now. You're gonna leave because we're kicking you out. And I'm like, I just go to that guy. I don't know, colleges. If they want to listen to this, the multicultural alliance person is very important, especially for minority people. You need to have a person like that there for us to go to and just have conversation with. I know some students, a friend of mine that said they didn't have that. I'm like, my goodness, that was a lifesaver to have that person there. I can just run to and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Somebody that have similar experiences that you can talk to, and they can provide that guidance. So it's very
absolutely,
helpful. So, do you know
absolutely.
your family migration story? I know you're second generation. Do you know your family migration story? Can you share that with us a little bit?
So my mom was born in Vieques, Puerto Rico. It's an island off of the mainland, and she was born in 42. So around 44, you know, there was a lot of issues with work, or lack thereof. So my mom tells me she remembers my grandmother being nervous because they took this little dinghy over to St. Croix, taking water in, and they got to St. Croix, and my grandfather started working. He was a builder. I think he was ahead of his time, because where he built his home was not till like 10, 15 years later. And he used to build, throughout the island. And my aunt tells me the story that, when when the hurricanes would come and go, he'd get in his little pickup truck, drive around the island, come back, crack a beer, put his feet up and say, yep, mine are still standing, you know? So the little home that he built um, is still standing, has withstood Hurricane Hugo and Maria,
Wow.
relatively unscathed. And, you know, when they went to clean like the cistern underneath, the guy said, you have a double cistern here, you know? Not many people do that. He did that. He did a block. The kitchen is just like a rectangular block, concrete. And that's like your fallout shelter, you know? So he was ahead of his time. But my mom was raised there, and then she came here. She was like 22. She came here, lived in the East End, off Washington Park, one of those little
That's
homes.
where I'm from, the East End. Ooh, ooh.
Washington Park. She could see it, and you know, she lived in like you know, people shared bathrooms. They just they rented a room, you know. So yeah, and she ended up finding people who were from Puerto Rico, and you know, then they found their own little network, and you know, went to church, and that's where she met a lot of her friends that, you know, she's had for a long time. So, and then she just started working. But yeah,
That's
it was my
amazing.
grandparents went from Vieques to St. Croix. So St. Croix really is home. But my dad's side of the family, there's some people still there in Vieques, but then she went from St. Croix in her 20s, early 20s to Bridgeport of all places. I don't know what made her go to Bridgeport. I don't know. My father
I've
had
asked a lot of my immigrant friends, so how do we end up in Bridgeport? But we're there. That's where we found our people. You know what? I think we found our people. Someone tell you to come, and then you come, and then the next person come, you know, and then we just have our own community.
Exactly. Yeah.
So getting back to the GI, what are some of the biggest challenges you foresee, you know, in this role for us? Like, what do we need to do so we can be better at this? Because we need to take
Well,
care of ourselves.
from a workers, from a provider standpoint,
Yeah. What do you need to what you need to tell us, really?
I
Come,
tell
I know
you.
my dad. He needs to go see GI. He needs to go in there. So what are you telling us?
So I'm telling my patients, that is,
Yes.
well, you know what? Be very open with your provider. You know, nothing is too. I feel out my patients, and some of them I can goof around with, and I think my colleagues were like, "What are you making? What are you guys laughing about in there?" But you find a way what is comfortable for them, and sometimes you crack a joke, and it just eases them. So be comfortable. Know that it's a relationship between you and your provider, and tell them those things that are a little bit embarrassing, because that's the difference between, oh, you need to look at this, or, oh, no, that's not anything, you know, don't worry about that. That's pretty normal. You know, one of the other things is talk to your family, and say, you know, anybody that you know of have like any problems with their colon, any blood in their stool, colon cancer, colon polyps, because, you know, it's the things we don't talk about that can hurt us sometimes. But
Mm.
trusting, and I remember my preceptor, um, at Duke, one of them that I did internal medicine with, she used to tell the patients, if you don't like your doctor, if you don't like your pharmacist, fire them. You're not married to them. You're married to your husband. Everybody else, you know what? You go somewhere else. And I, you know, I keep it real with them, because it's like, this is all I know. You know, but I want you to talk to me. I want you to feel comfortable with me. If I'm not your person, my feelings won't be hurt. Feel free to see one of my colleagues, because at the end of the day, I want to take care of you to the best of my ability. And having this open dialect is very important. If you say to me, "It's Mark, go pound sand," you know, I'm not doing this. Okay, received, you know. But the most important thing for the people in our community is talk to your family. You know, try to get a sense of what the family history is like, number one. Number two, you know, have an open conversation. It should be like a friendship with your provider, you know, and trust that, you know, they're doing what's best for you. Number three, if you don't agree, as I used to tell my kids, we can agree to disagree, but we'll do so respectfully, you know?
Hmm.
And that is just, you know what? Well, I was really hoping that I didn't have to take this medication. Is there something else that we can try? Don't be afraid. Number 4, don't be afraid to do your own research. But, I have some people say to me, well, you guys don't like it when we, Dr. Google. I said, well, to a certain extent, if you're going to read something, read it from a reputable source, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic. What does the World Health Organization say? When it comes to GI, I refer people to the American College of Gastroenterology. There's some things you have to log in to do, but the general preface is, you have information that is accessible to you so that you have evidence-based information. It's not just somebody decided this is a good idea, but the studies shown that, this is effective. There's, people ask me about, for example, probiotics. Well, there's still kind of a toss-up. Some people believe in it, some people don't. And it's just getting the understanding of where does your doctor come from? What is their training? What is their position of health? And, you're kind of interviewing them like, they're interviewing you kind of thing. So open dialect, and then, just try to follow the rules that we give you. Or let's say, hey, that's not anything I'm familiar with in my diet. What other ideas do you have? Like, I'm very open to, some people tell me certain things. I don't know about it, but I'm going to research it so that the next time you come, or I can reach out to you and say, this is what I found out, and I'm going to endorse it as long as it works for you. Or I don't know if it's going to interact with other things or if it's really going to help, kind of thing. So
I like that, because like you go get your physical every so often, right? There's a time you go get your physical. Is there a test we need to do, or is also because I feel like once you start having gut problems or any kind of problems, it's kind of like late. Is there anything we can do pre that? Like, check for inflammatories, check for deficiencies in your body to give you indicators or indication that you need to go get a checkup internally?
Well, yeah. So typically, when you go see your primary care doctor, they do a head to toe assessment. They do some blood work. They check your chemistries. They check your your complete blood count. One of the things that I've learned to look at too is your vitamin D. A lot of people, when the more melanin we have, the more protected we are from the sun. And so when people say, "Oh, go out and get some sun," well, that works well for somebody who's very fair skinned, but for those of us who have more melanin, and the more we have, the more you don't get it through, you might need that supplement,
Huh. I did not know that, Martha. I thought I was all set because I'm black and beautiful.
You are black and beautiful, and you're also protected from the rays of the sun, your vitamin, your D. So you find a lot of deficiency in the community. So one of the things to have checked, because it's a little vitamin, but at the same time, you know, it can lead to a lot of other issues. So having that checked, having your thyroid checked, so the basic panel, your cholesterol levels, and then things that you can do, because I've been trying to do a lot more reading, listening to podcasts. I was mentioning Dr. Huberman out of Stanford, and then he interviewed another gentleman. There's a podcast, and it's about the food that we eat, the processed foods we eat, and what it does to our body. And so for a lot of us, right, it's easy to just go buy McDonald's or go to Subway or whatever. But your husband mentioned a good point about when you stopped eating out, it was healthier because now you're cooking from home. You know what ingredients you're using. You weren't having as much processed food. And so, one of the things to do is look at the diet, go back to basics,
Yeah.
am I having a meat that's roasted instead of fried? Am I having more vegetables? Fiber is a big thing that a lot of us don't get. Fruits, vegetables, more vegetables. And if you're more of a smoothie person, like I always tell people, you get a lot of bang for your buck with chia seed and flax seed.
I will try it.
Yeah, so those are the those are the things that I would do is, they do their assessment, you give them the history, and nowadays, they're asking, do you feel safe at home? Do you wear a seatbelt? Do you have handrails at home? Do you have smoke detectors, CO detectors? All of these things are important because what they're trying to do is establish a holistic view. Do you feel safe at home? Yeah, all of those things. And then they do the blood work, and then how you feel, right? And then for, women, right, you have to have your mammograms. You have to have your PAPs, right? And then men after a certain age, they need to have their prostate exam. And 45 is the new age for everyone to have colon screenings, unless they're having
Oh.
issues. So if you haven't had one yet, you're due. You know?
Good to know. 45, y'all, get out there, get out there. Is there, as we're coming to a close, any stories or any situation that just have a big impact on you? Any memorable experience that you've had in your career that just gave you a different outlook?
One of the things that gave me pause is, as nurses and now as a nurse practitioner, you just want to help. You just want to make things better. You think you can fix everything, or at least you go out there tackling the world that way. And you have to understand that sometimes people just want to know what the possibilities of what they're feeling could be, and they should be allowed to make their own decisions. So I had someone who had issues um, with an upper GI issue, right? And based on the history, my antennae went up. I'm thinking, this person could potentially have cancer. So one of the biggest things we do is we make a recommendation to have an upper endoscopy, right? Because what we're looking for is, is there an infection? Is there a web? Is there a ring? Is there a stricture? Something that's preventing the food from going down smoothly, right? Down the swallowing. And most importantly, is there a cancer there? Especially when you have, difficulty swallowing and weight loss, right? So they're not getting the nutrition, but is it because they're not getting the nutrition, or is it because there's something else there that's starting to, pull away from the body? Cancer loves sugar, and people with cancer tend to lose weight,
Mm.
unexpected weight loss, and when, do you have unexpected? So you go through a series of questions. And when I made my recommendation, that individual was in their 90s, looked at me straight in the eye and said, I've lived my life. I don't know that I want to do this. Because you also have to go over the risks and the benefits, right? There is a possibility that you can perforate something. It's a rare risk, but you still need to know it. And if you perforate and this person dies and they probably had 2 more good years, you have to weigh those. But that person had already said, what they find isn't going to change. I'm not going to put myself through chemo. I'm not going to have surgery. And so I'm just going to deal with it. And it gave me pause. Like I felt myself getting like really like teary eyed, and I just, collected myself and I said, you know what? And I respect your decision. It's very important that you make an informed decision. That person was of sound mind and their spouse was there. And so we had this conversation about what is it that is important to you. And so I had to
Mm.
bring it back to, it's not just what I want, it's what I think. You tell me what's going on. I critically think through what it could be. I make some recommendations. Doesn't mean you have to do it. As long as it's well informed, then you have made a decision. And that's what was important to this person. And that stuck with me because it brings it back to the relationship between the provider and the patient, and respecting where they're coming from. You can't twist their arm and make them do it anyway. It's just
Mm.
understanding, meeting that person at their point of need. They needed to know what is the potential of what's going on. They needed to weigh the risks and the benefits of undergoing a procedure. And they needed to make a decision that they can live with, and that their partner, their spouse, was on board with it. I got the nicest
Wow.
letter a few weeks later, very grateful, but I don't know whatever happened, but I felt I did my due diligence and I respected them
Mm.
and met them where they needed to be.
Wow. 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 That's a hard one.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, something I do and then I ask my guests here is that what is one saying or parable that your parents, or in your case, your mom always say to you growing up that teached you a lesson?
Oh goodness. When I thought about that, when I was listening to the sign off on your previous one, I was like, oh, that one's an easy one. My mom used to say, El que no coge consejo no llega viejo. So he who does not take advice will not grow old.
I like that. That is
that's
good. He who would not take advice will not grow old. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Martha, for being here. I really appreciate everything that you share with us. I know the listeners going to get a lot from that. So until next time, everyone, you've been listening to Island Money 365. I'm your host, Petra. Until next time, remember, keep your money IRA.